At the end of 2019, I was heartbroken and depressed after just another devastating breakup. I had been through a series of toxic and codependent relationships, and I really felt like a lost case. I was highly anxious and needy when dating and in relationships. I was constantly waiting for text messages and I was scared of being abandoned. I was constantly overthinking and ruminating all day long. And I just kept on attracting emotionally unavailable and avoidant people over and over and over again. It was like Groundhog Day. And after 10 years of suffering, I truly thought something was totally wrong with me and that lasting love just wasn't in the cards for me. And I had read all the books, I did all the therapy, and yet here I was once again, shattered and drowning in grief, doubting myself and life, and just feeling unlovable and just not good enough for anyone. Now, fast forward to today. It is 2024. I've been in a healthy and wonderful relationship for over 4 years. We recently got married, actually, and life is just really good. No more dramas, no more anxiety. I feel safe. I feel at home in my relationship. And so you might be wondering, what happened, Connie? How did you do that? Well, that's what I want to answer in this video. I'm going to share everything I did that actually helped me heal my anxious attachment. I will also share what a secure attachment style actually looks like, and what it feels like in real life. And really, I just want to give you a sense of hope. Because trust me, 5 years ago, I had no idea this kind of love and this kind of life would actually be possible for me. Now, the first thing to understand before we go any further is, why do we develop anxious attachment in the first place? In other words, why are we the way we are? And why do we struggle so much in relationships? Why is it so hard? Why do we suffer so hard? If we often experience unstable and problematic relationships, there is a reason for this. Usually there is an origin to how we live and experience relationships today. Your childhood experiences, the first years of your life, especially up until the age of around 7, they shape how we live relationships and what we consider normal in relationships, and how much love we receive, how we resolve conflicts, which partners we choose. Our childhood is like a template. It's like a blueprint for our adult relationships. And so anxious attachment is basically an adaptive survival strategy to what we experienced and learned growing up. So we project the relationship dynamics that we experienced as children onto the people that we date. And it's important to realize that behind us adults in relationships are actually wounded children. We unconsciously recreate the familiar experiences from our childhood in our adult relationships, and so we keep on repeating the same circumstances which activate old woundings and old traumas. And when our old woundings are activated, our nervous system gets dysregulated. We move into hyperarousal and we tend to have quite extreme reactions. Now, here's what's really important to understand. It's not our fault. It's not your fault, and it was never my fault, and we didn't do anything wrong to receive these imprints. Now, for example, if your need for connection keeps getting rejected by your mother, you will start to feel lonely and maybe learn that you have to perform and be a really good child to receive love and attention. Or if your parents were always busy and unavailable, you learn that love isn't always available for me. And so you learn to adapt. And so we eventually feel it's normal that we aren't valued for who we are and that we don't feel seen and heard. It's just how it is, right? And so as an adult, you might feel needy and think that your expectations in relationships are simply too much. That's what I always thought, because I felt like something was wrong with me and that it was my expectations and whatever I needed in relationships was just impossible. Now, in my case, I had to go through a long series of unhealthy, toxic relationships. And It eventually, though, took this one last terrible dating situation in April of 2020 for me to realize that things really needed to change this time. I was not prepared to keep going like this. It was a situation where I literally thought I was developing backwards. I was like, wow, I've been doing all this inner work and here I am once again. Yeah. And so once that situationship ended, by the way, against my wish, even though it was completely unhealthy, I made the decision to stay away from dating and focus on really, truly healing myself this time. I deleted all dating apps and I committed to learning to fall in love with being single because I realized that I kept dating from a place of fear, from a place of scarcity, which led me to ignoring all the red flags just so I wouldn't be alone. I painted a lot of red flags green. That was one of my biggest mistakes. And so after that, actually, it only took a few more months until my now partner entered my life highly unexpectedly. I wasn't looking for anything. I was just kind of doing my thing. And then, whoops, there she was. And looking back, I think it was a lot of the inner work I had done in the years leading up to this point, and then my absolute surrender and dedication to my healing process. Now, what actually helped me to go from anxious to secure attachment? Well, so as mentioned, I tried a lot of things. I tried a lot of modalities over the years, and I really only want to share with you what really made a difference. Now, this first point is a really important first step, and if you're watching this video, I think you're already on the right track. And that is learning about attachment trauma and developmental trauma. When I discovered this realm, things finally started to click for me. My mind was literally blown. I remember I came across the book Attached. It was kind of like my doorway into this whole world of attachment dynamics and developmental trauma. I could finally understand myself and the people that I was dating. It really helped me to understand that nothing was wrong with me, that it wasn't my fault, and I could finally stop judging myself because I had a very, very loud inner critic. By really diving deeper into learning about attachment dynamics, developmental trauma, I was able to develop a new sense of self-compassion and self-acceptance. And I feel like that was a very crucial step on my journey. Just creating awareness around why I behaved and reacted the way I did made a huge, huge difference. And in that process, I went inwards in a whole new way and really was curious to find out what my personal individual attachment triggers are and what my coping strategies were. And it really required me to take a really hard look at myself and be honest with myself to see how was I contributing to all this drama in my relationships. Now, there's a few books that I can highly recommend that you check out. The first one is the first one that I read, which is Attached by Dr. Amir Levine, I believe, and Rachel Heller. And then also a really good book is How to Be the Love You Seek by Dr. Nicole LePera, also known as the holistic psychologist. Also, The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Even though it's more general about trauma, I think it's a really good book to just really understand the realm of trauma. And Healing Developmental Trauma by Lawrence Heller. It's a little bit more geared towards professionals, but I think it's also one of the best books that really goes into all the details and nitty-gritty of developmental trauma and attachment issues. Now, do not get stuck in this researching and learning phase, and don't just focus on understanding avoidance. Really focus on understanding yourself, learning about anxious attachment. It's so easy for us anxious attachers to wanting to understand the avoidance, right? But really, the solution isn't just in understanding the avoidance, it's in understanding yourself. Now, the second step that I took was rather difficult, and I do believe, though, it is a necessary step for many of us, and it definitely was an important step for me. And that was detoxing from dating and the whole roller coaster of relationships. I really needed to surrender to being single. I went from one relationship to another, or really situationship oftentimes, or I was just, even when I was single, I was on dating apps and very unhealthy because it just kept on triggering my nervous system. And so that decision to really commit to falling in love with being alone and with being single was a big one for me. I really made the commitment to myself that if I could find a way to be okay with the idea that maybe I will have to spend the rest of my life being alone and being single, that would be okay, that was a huge deal for me, because that was my absolute biggest fear, was being alone and being single for a long time or for the rest of my life. This was like my absolute nightmare. Just making that decision and really staying away from all these dating apps and not getting involved with anybody, no texting, nothing, it really helped my nervous system to get back into regulation, right? When we're always dating, when we're always seeing someone, when we're always in touch with exes and, potential partners, we're basically always in an activated state. And it's very hard to do any sort of real healing work when we're always being activated. This might not be the best solution for everyone out there, but I can highly, highly recommend taking a break from dating just to give your nervous system a bit of a breather. That then gives way to the next phase, which for me was really going even deeper into exploring the roots in my childhood and healing the wounded parts of me. And so I doubled down on working with my somatic therapist, and she was trained in somatic experiencing and also NARM. And so on the one hand, I believe therapy is important because we can create a coherent narrative that influences our attachment style. But also I think it's really important to do this work with a therapist because the trauma happened in relationship, and I do believe that trauma also needs to happen in relationship. And the relationship that we have to our therapist is an important relationship. I believe we need someone that can mirror back certain aspects of our traumas and the dynamics that we constantly live out. And so working with someone who is specialized in attachment trauma in general, I think that was crucial, rather than working with someone who's trained in CBT or, just talk therapy. I believe it's really important to find someone whose specialty it is to work with people who've experienced developmental trauma and have issues in relationships. I think that's a very special sort of niche among therapists, and I can only highly recommend you look for someone who's trained in NARM and somatic experiencing. Now, I also had a few ceremonies with my shaman in Ecuador back in 2019, and they were also very revealing, because they allowed me to see the dynamics that I find myself in relationships and how they compare to how I grew up. And so I was able to, in these ceremonies, go really deep and just gain a better and a new understanding of the issues that I was dealing with and why I kept on repeating the same relationship dynamics. So that was a big one as well. And I'm so grateful for my shaman and the work that I did with him. I'm also very grateful because that was the time that I went super, super deep into breath work. I discovered it a few years before, but this was the time where I was like, okay, now I'm ready to get really intimate with the breath. And so I did a lot of conscious connected breathwork sessions, one-on-one, in groups. And those were really, really important on the one hand, because they allowed me to really process the grief from this one breakup that happened in 2019, but also to really process all the other situationships and relationships before that and really properly digest and process the grief and all the anger from those experiences. And so the breath was a huge, huge ally and companion for me during that time. And it was just a really great way to get out of my head, get into my body, and access expanded states of consciousness and really allow myself to explore myself and my past and my traumas in a whole new light. So that was big. Another modality that was really important for me that I discovered around that time was parts work, and just the idea of reparenting certain parts of myself, the younger parts of myself, and really reintegrating them. And in the process of doing parts work, and yeah, of course, it's sort of, in a way, it's inner child work, but inner child work is just one aspect of parts work. But that process really also helped me to go deeper in terms of self-compassion, self-acceptance. But I generally think it's a really good idea to get in touch with these wounded, younger parts of ourselves that we've in many cases probably tried to suppress, and that we shame, and that we don't want to get in touch with. And I felt the same way for many years. I didn't want to get in touch with these younger parts. I was very anti inner child work. I just didn't want anything to do with it, until I realized, wow, this is actually super, super healing for this process. And so eventually you're going to be dating again. And I found myself dating just a few months after I'd made that decision. My now wife entered my life, as I said, extremely unexpectedly. And the most important thing in that phase is to really be aware of red flags. Now, my issue actually at the time was that I was looking for red flags everywhere. And I eventually found myself looking for red flags even though they were actually green. And I was so scared of ignoring red flags, so I went a little overboard. But I think I can only highly recommend to be very conscious and to actually take red flags seriously, and to at least pause, reflect, and see if you want to move forward, or to actually talk to the person that you're dating and bring it up. Right? But to really be very conscious and really open your eyes and be honest with yourself when it comes to things that might trigger you, situations that might feel a little off. Check in with yourself. Is this what I want? Can I talk about this? What's going on here? And for that, I believe it's really essential that you know what's important to you. What are your values in relationships? What is a non-negotiable in relationships or when you're dating? For me, for example, it was that someone is reliable, that the person that I'm dating gets back to me, when we're texting, in a reasonable amount of time. And that when they say, one thing, that they actually mean it. When they say they're going to show up, that they actually show up, that they don't constantly cancel plans. Like, all this kind of stuff was really, really important to me, that I could actually rely on someone. The other thing I think is really important is that you're on this inner healing journey. And I think it's important that you find someone who's also willing to do the deep inner work with you. And that, again, was something that was very important for me. And when I then met my now wife, it turns out she was willing to go there with me. And that was something completely new, because all the people that I dated beforehand, I was lacking awareness around all these issues. And so they did too. And we just didn't have common ground to actually go deep together and do it in a healthy way. And so this is something that I can only highly recommend, that you actually look for someone that has already someone who's already done their own inner work. They've done a fair amount of healing work. They have developed a certain amount of self-awareness, so that there is actually potential for you to do the healing work together. And to actually do the healing work together, it also means that you need to learn to communicate your needs. And that was something that I really struggled with, because before, I always felt like I was communicating my needs, but I actually did it in a more passive-aggressive way. And so this time around, I actually needed to communicate my needs in a way where we could talk about it and where I wasn't attacking my partner, but where I was, simply sharing what I needed in certain moments, or what I wanted or needed in a relationship, what was important to me, and to actually communicate my needs from a place of vulnerability rather than aggressiveness or anger, which is what I used to do in the past, which then caused, a lot of the drama. And to be able to do that, it meant that I needed to learn how to self-regulate myself and how to self-soothe, right? Again, something that I think many of us that struggle with anxious attachment really have an issue with is, how do I soothe myself when I'm triggered, when I'm activated, right? When this anxiety comes up, how do I find back into balance without always having to rely on my partner or the person that I'm dating, right? How can I be responsible for my own regulation? For me, the breath was a huge resource to regulate my nervous system when I was triggered. And there's so many beautiful practices, and just being able to reconnect to myself and to soothe myself in moments where my anxiety was activated, that was huge, because that empowered me. I wasn't just this victim anymore, and I didn't have to rely on my partner all the time. And so finding resources that really help you to come back into a regulated state, I believe, is huge, because when you're dealing with anxious attachment, it's very easy to fall outside of your window of tolerance and then struggle to come back in, which is when we then react in ways that we actually don't want to react to. We might say things that we regret later on. And now lastly, there really is only so much healing work that you can do on your own, because in the end, you will need to make new correcting experiences in relationships. So you're gonna have to have healing experiences in relationship with your partner. What happened for us was that the first few months, of course, honeymoon phase and whatnot, but after that, and it happens in every relationship, your issues will come up. And so that might be after 3 months, it might be after 6 months, but it'll happen, right? And so it happened for us, of course. And we then decided that, okay, we really want to work on this consciously. And so we went to see a somatic trauma couples therapist, I think after about 3 months or so. And that made all the difference. We, I think, had, maybe 3 or 4 sessions initially, and they were absolute game changers. They really helped us to understand each other more, helped us to work on our communication, and just be, more considerate with the other person, but also with ourselves. And so I can highly recommend, if you find yourself with a partner eventually that is open to working on this together, then just go and do a few sessions with a therapist. It can be so helpful and really save you a lot of drama. You don't have to figure it all out by yourselves. And I think that is something that so many of us think in relationships. Many of us never really learned how to have a healthy relationship. And so we then think we have to figure it all out by ourselves. But I think it's actually more than smart to get help and get support. Now, it took us several months to really find a flow, and I had to learn a lot about my fears along the way. But my partner was committed, and I'm incredibly thankful that she was willing to do the work together. And I remember my body was freaking out like crazy in the first few months when we started dating. And I got really worried that, oh my God, this is a really bad sign. I had this breakup with eczema and psoriasis, and I had this eye infection. This was like in the first month or 2 after we'd met. And a lot of doubts came up. But eventually, and especially because we went to see this therapist, I realized, wow, being in relationship is really challenging for my nervous system. And so finding ways with her, with my partner, but also just with myself to really regulate my nervous system more and more, finding ways that I can feel safer in relationship, that was my journey. And eventually my symptoms disappeared, and we're still together. We're married now, so it all worked out after all, but it was definitely a rocky start. And so today, when I look back on all these years of suffering, I almost can't believe I made it this far. These days I never worry about our relationship. I don't experience any fear of abandonment anymore. Like, on the contrary, I'm now actually more leaning towards a bit of an avoidant attachment sometimes, only moments when my capacities are really stretched. But today I really consider myself being securely attached, and it just means I can totally relax in my relationship. And when we have fights, they're not these big dramas anymore. We never actually had issues or situations where we threatened to leave the relationship. It never went that far in our relationship, which just really shows that, she was actually the one that entered the relationship as more secure. Now, here's one last piece of advice. You have to start making new choices. You gotta learn to say no to potential partners that are emotionally unavailable, that don't just feel right. And you gotta learn to identify a secure relationship, a secure partner. And you have to realize that you're worth it, that you can go from being anxiously attached to being secure attached, but it does depend on you making new choices. Now, I really hope that you learned something here in this video. I hope I can give you some hope for your own journey. And now that you know how I went from anxious to secure attachment, the next step is to learn how to do the inner work. And so click on this video here where I show you exactly how to go about it, and I will see you soon. Peace.